Today we're going to be taking a little look at estates, their power and political power overall. To start with, if we head to the government screen, we can see a breakdown of the estates and their influence. When we hover over one of the estates, for example the nobility, we see that they have 23% of the relative power in the country due to them having 627% of the 2,720 political power in the nation. But what is political power? It says it comes from pops. So let's look at an example. If we zoom in on Constantinopolis, capital of the world, and then we go to the demographs screen, and we look at this handy little pie chart here. This is where we can see the political power. If we hover over the nobility, we'll see that they are receiving 35% of the political power in this province, which translates to 89.86 political power. If we hover over this big red number, we'll actually get even more information. Here we can see how much political power a pop makes overall. Here we can see that a noble produces 25 political power by default. If we check on some of the other estates, for example the commoners, and we hover over the red button, we'll see that a commoner produces 0.02 political power, while a burgher produces a 2 political power. That 2 is then expanded based on the amount of pops in the province and then modified by these numbers. For example, we have the marketplace that is built in the province. We then have plenty of opportunity, our trade versus tax base, and then we have the estate privileges that have been handed out, further modifying the number. This leads to the estate having 102 political power in this location. I actually whipped out my calculator and tried to add up these numbers together to see if they would equal 102 political power that we gain. With middling success, I ended up being rather close. It could just be that I made a miscalculation somewhere. If you would like to add up all these numbers together, I'm sure there are people who are better with a calculator than I am, or math in general, to see if they to arrive at the number I arrived at. The number I arrived at was 0.10141, which is rather close to the 10211 that we have as our percentage. Political power is then calculated for every single location in the game. If you click on every single one of them, you will see that the political power is being produced in that location due to the estate's power, which is usually just due to the amount of pops in the province, in the location, modified by the various privileges that have been handed out to the estates, as well as certain values. For example, aristocracy modifies the noble power. The estate's power then stems from the overall number that is produced, which is then turned into a percentage and handed out to the estates based on their share of that percentage. But what about crown power? Where does that stem from? If we look at crown power, it's a little different, where the political power stems simply from the population as opposed to the number of pops in an estate. But then why is our political power so low relatively? When there's millions of people in the country, surely we should have more political power. Well, control comes into this. Whereas normal estates aren't affected by control, we are. The crown loses political power in a location based on the amount of control. If you're sitting at 100% control, then you have 100% of the political power in a province, in a location. But in locations that are further afield, where control has dropped, you can see we are losing a percentage of the political power produced in the location. Another reason why getting your control up is so important. There are some other modifiers. For example, if we head over to the production tab and we hit this estate buttons display button, and we can see the buildings the estates have built that benefit them. If we look in roads, we have a few buildings. We have this artisan guild, which modifies the local burgher's power. We have this toll castle, which increases the amount of nobles in the location. We have this burgher's manor, which increases burgher power further. We have this local shrine, which again increases cleric power. And you'll actually see we can't demolish these buildings. because we don't have a high enough control. So as you can see, it's a good idea to keep an eye on what buildings your estates are building, because not all of them are beneficial. The thing you'd want to do is really just destroy these buildings, because very few of them provide any benefit. Mainly just the burgher ones provide a benefit, but all of the other estates, that being peasants, nobles, clerics, don't provide any benefit. In fact, peasants like to build these pirate havens, which increases the chance of pirates in the sea next to the location, which is not beneficial at all. When it comes to crown power, there's quite a few ways that we can modify it. There is legitimacy, centralization value, some various research, some buildings like the royal court, which you can build in your capital, and then your reforms and laws, as well as your ruler's administrative ability, where the members of the royal court have positions. For example, any member of your court who's put into either an admiralty or an army gives a flat 25% increase to political power. And then members of your family who are members of the cabinet, again, provide an extra 5%. You can modify that 5% even further by making somebody the head of the cabinet, which will provide a flat 25% crown power. Then, of course, we have reforms. If we actually look at reforms, we can see that there's quite a few that modify political power in some way. For example, local army organization, which would increase levy size but increase the peasants' power by 25%. Or patrimonialism, which will give a flat minus 50% to all estates' power, which is pretty great if you can get it. Some of the obvious ones to hand out are ones like autocracy, which gives a flat 10% to your crown power, or royal decree, which again hands out a flat 10% to your crown power. As the ages go by and you research more and more texts, you'll gain more access to more and more reforms, as well as laws. For example, if we look here at the right of the nobility advance, this will give us access to the rights of the nobility law, which has a few options. For example, you can strengthen the nobility, which increases their power by 10%, or you could curtail the nobility, which gives a flat decrease to their power of 10%. As well as blocking them from the cabinet and increasing centralization. It may feel at the start of the game that you are completely trapped by estates and unable to influence them, but that's kind of intentional, as at the start of the game, estates like the nobility are ascendant, and only after the hundreds of years pass will you finally be able to really reel them in. To bring this video to a close, political power for your estates stems from their numbers, as well as the various buildings that are built in locations, as well as privileges. But I'm sure you already knew that. Whereas crown power comes mainly from, again, the amount of pops that exist, modified by the control in the location, and then further modified by various factors. Unfortunately, there's no kill all nobles button in your country, or anywhere. So it's not an option to simply just remove them, but there are ways you can influence the amount of nobles in locations. The amount of buildings in a location will affect how many of that pop exists there. For example, we have a castle here in Constantinople. If we were to demolish it, the floor for the amount of nobles would decrease by 20. And as you can see, aristocracy here is modifying the amount of nobles by 50%. So again, if we were to get aristocracy down, the amount of nobles that exist in Constantinople would decrease, and therefore their power would decrease. But you might actually say, we've already kind of done that. As you can see, the burghers have actually overtaken the nobility here in Constantinople and are the main source of political power here, and are getting the lion's share of it. Unfortunately, you'll never really reach a point where an estate is getting no political power, because political power stems from the pops themselves, which also is the same for the crown. So they'll always have some political power. The question will always be how much, as you want as much as possible for the crown, for the political power to be in the hands of the crown, because the bonuses from crown power increase the more control you have. Whereas with the estates, if they go over 25%, they start to provide negatives. Whereas below 25%, they increase the maximum tax for that estate. But now though, we'll leave it there. I hope this video has been helpful to help you understand where political power comes from and how it translates to the estate's overall power. If you have any questions or anything you want to say, I'm sure there's maybe something I've missed or something that you've discovered that I haven't, feel free to let me know in the comments. I hope you like my large Byzantine Empire. Although we don't have much actual land, we do have a lot of money. You could even say vassals are a little OP in the current iteration of the game. But either way, thank you for watching and see you next time.